So good morning, everyone. So today we have our first class of the day, Thursday, with Professor Mariano. It's a professor from the Institute. So thank you very much, Mariano, for the participation.
Thank you for inviting me. So good morning, everyone. As I just said, I'm very pleased and honored to be here today. I think we have a very contemporary issue to discuss. I'm going to follow a presentation that I used 3-4 weeks ago in Argentina. I was invited to discuss the same topic we're going to talk about today with a group of public officials working for subnational governments, that will be provincial governments in Argentina. So the presentation is in Spanish, but I'm using it mostly because of the pictures, not examples. There are no tables, charts there to follow, don't worry about that. So what I'm going to do in the time we have available is to first start describing very rapidly, summarizing how we got to the current international productive system, globally integrated. Then I'm going to describe how this system became under stress for several reasons during the last decade, how it is reacting to several very strong shocks, and apparently moving in new directions. So, having done that, I will try to address what opportunities might be there in these new directions for the Global South, if there are any. So that's the overall structure of my presentation. And I'll try to encourage you to take part. Just be on listening, to make questions and comments, and please help me to get a dialogue going on. Okay? So let's start from the beginning. The current productive system, which is extremely spread around the world and globally integrated, has been like that for the last few decades, is the outcome of a long evolutionary process which started about 2 centuries ago, to say the least. If we track the beginning of this system to the industrial revolutions, and go back in time to somewhere in the second half of the 19th century, maybe the first half, and we look at the picture of how things were done at the time geographically, then you'll notice that at the beginning we had a highly concentrated manufacturing activities, mostly in England, and progressively also in Europe. Not all Europe, but France, Germany, some region north in Italy. It was a relatively small manufacturing size and its ability to create output. The main energy source was coal. You have to burn coal to make machines work. And then you notice how things have changed. This system evolved, increasingly expanded first, increasingly supplying itself from raw materials from elsewhere, from other regions in the world. So South America, Australia, New Zealand supplied food, supplied India cotton, supplied wool, but most of manufacturing activity was highly concentrated in Europe. It was at the beginning an Eurocentric manufacturing system. If we fly from this moment in time, if we move forward to the second half of the 20th century, 100 years forward, we'll notice how much things had already changed. Manufacturing had spread to new regions. In Asia, Japan, which actually had some manufacturing in the late 19th century. South America, you had some degree of manufacturing, some development, industrial development in Argentina, Brazil, because of the inability to keep importing manufacturing goods during the 30s and also during the war. So import substitution had established some manufacturing here in South America. It was no longer burning coal. It was already fossil fuels. It was oil mainly. The region kept supplying raw materials. The Middle East had come into the picture. Another difference was that, but that was not in the second half, it happened in the first half of the 20th century. It had evolved from an Eurocentric system to an Atlantic system. The US was already the leading manufacturing place. And you had these new regions, Japan and Asia, Latin America. The Middle East supplied oil, basically, but also Venezuela. That's a second moment. But finally, if we go back to the late 20th century, if we go back to 1994, to be precise, which was the year that the final round, the agreement of the round of Uruguay round of GATT was finally signed by more than 100 countries. That changed a lot in many dimensions, but specifically for the manufacturing, it meant the opening of national markets to trade. So, trade of goods, trade of capital increased rapidly. There was a new world order being built. Some specific agreements about intellectual property rights, about what was fair and unfair to do regarding attracting investment for manufacturing, investment in trade. All this brought a new opportunity for reorganizing manufacturing all over the world. It didn't, actually, a few years later, 20 years later, beginning of the 21st century, 2006, 7, 8, changes were already very noticeable. In a couple of decades, maybe 15 years, China became, in fact, the world factory. And the system that was built originally as Eurocentric and then Atlantic-centric became Asian-centric. If you look at the numbers in the early 21st century, China was already concentrating more than half of world manufacturing. In some sectors, 80%. In some products, 90% of world output was being produced in China. I'm focusing on the GATT agreement because it's a very specific date, but if you go into history, into the details, you will see that some of the things started before. There are other events that help explain how this was, how this outcome came to be. One important one was the Plaza Agreement, if you remember. So exchange rates were also important, not only norms and regulations about trade and investment. Well, but the fact is that when we reached the beginning of the 21st century, we already had this global system working with intense flows of goods, technology, capital, to some degree people, not as much, but it was working. And then, if you look at the literature and what was written at the time, you will see that, I'm seeing one slide here and another one. It's good. If you go back to what was written at the time, new words, keywords appeared in the literature. We start talking about global firms, we start talking about global value chains, we start talking about global tax. If you read the literature on trade, you will see that intermediate goods trade increased much more than final goods. You will see that capital flows and trade grew more rapidly than output, the GDP. Mergers and acquisitions, markets consolidated. So all these movements, all these changes were symptoms of the profound and rapid changes that the manufacturing system was undergoing. If you look back at that and see what were the main features of this new global integrated system, you will find that first, manufactured goods became extremely cheap. Relative prices changed very fast. At the beginning, in the Eurocentric manufacturing systems, manufactured goods were scarce and extremely expensive. Now, in this system, they were cheap, relatively cheap compared to services, for instance, and abundant. So we went to a much more efficient and large manufacturing system, globally integrated. Of course, this system was not without flaws. There were some perceived flaws in this system that before long became a problem. One of the flaws, if you want, was that it was associated with the international distribution of labor between North and South that created strong imbalances in capital accumulation and income flows. One of the ways to perceive this was looking at how global firms distributed their activities all over the world. So they took advantage of their capacity to command and reorganize production to locate in the north activities related to highly valuable assets like design, like knowledge, and located in the south activities intensive in energy, in cheap labor. The way they organized production created these imbalances in how much value could be created and captured and kept in the South. If you look at the last report from UNCTAD, the Trade and Development 2022, there's a very interesting chapter that describes how these global corporations did their tax planning, moving activities that could be subject to high taxation to low taxation countries. So beyond inequalities in income, there were also consequences for public finance, for taxes. So these flaws, together with other maybe more important, like the financial dimension, how all this was financed, ended up taking us to the 2008 crisis. If you look at the 2008 crisis as a financial phenomenon, you were probably right. That was the most visible and most important dimension of the crisis. But it was also, maybe not so much in a visible way, the crisis of this globally integrated manufacturing system. Because what you had in 2008 was the consequence, not only of financial wealth balances, families, business, and national states. It was also trade, the consequence of trade imbalances. There were countries, this system created a group of countries that were systematically in deficit in their external accounts, and countries which were systematically accumulating foreign exchange. So the productive system, the manufacturing system is also part of the story. It is true that this crisis was not the first. There were also crises very early, during the 90s. If you remember, we had in the 90s the crisis in Asia, and then the crisis in Russia, and then in 1998, the crisis in Argentina, in 1999 in Brazil. We had an election then. And in 2001, we had the Nasdaq crisis. But this crisis, mainly those in the South, Asia, Argentina, Russia, Brazil, were considered to be symptoms of local problems, local and temporary. Even the Nasdaq crisis in 2001 was considered to be somehow something that had to do with Wall Street, institutions, lack of regulation, a bubble, tech bubble. What we had in 2008 was much more serious. Actually, we're still suffering the consequences of that crisis. So, 2008 is a disruption that could not be ignored. It was clearly a consequence of this way to organize this new type of global economic structure. To add fuel to the fire, it didn't take long to have a second structural shock, which was a pandemic. The 2008 crisis showed that the structure had some problems. The pandemic was an external shock. It really didn't come out from the system, but the system suffered. And it had a very interesting consequence. It showed the fragility, the vulnerability of the system. Because during the pandemic, this globally integrated system broke down. You couldn't get vaccines. You couldn't even get masks. It's a very simple product. If you think of it, it's very easy to manufacture it. You don't need very complex, sophisticated machinery, skilled workforce. It's just masks. I don't know about you, where you were, but we were here looking to planes landing at the airport. A new plane arrived from China. We might be able to get 1 million, 2 million, 3 million vaccines now. We can produce them. So the pandemic brought this sense of vulnerability. Pandemic brought this sense of, I can do both things, don't I? I used to be more multitask, but I'm not task. These are global firms. This is a system. That's a very nice picture. I like it. You know what it shows? Each dot there is an IP. It's a web identity. At a certain time, on a certain day, it shows how much connected the system was. Not only, of course, for manufacturing, but for everyday life, supporting a global society, a global economy. Of course, unequal. You see high concentration, the Atlantic system here, but you see the periphery, you see the south. Asia, Japan, China, India. Should have shown that before. I was part of the show. Okay. That's a global crisis with all its outcome. I like these pictures. That's the pandemic. And the sense of fragility, vulnerability that it brought. And then the idea that, and complete the picture. You have the crisis, you have the pandemic, and then you have a war. We talk about the Ukrainian war, the war in Ukraine, but it's a war between the West and Russia. It's a war between NATO and Russia. So this also added to the perception that something is wrong. We can't rely on a global integrated manufacturing system because countries regard each other as enemies. So you cannot consider granted that you will get the supplies, not the machines, not of the raw materials, not of the technology, not anymore. So if you have the crisis, pandemic, and now the war, which will last. Even after peace is bargained, the war will last. Then it's clear that the system will no longer stay as it was built. It will move towards new directions. And as I said before, we need to guess in what directions it will move and try to assess if there are any opportunities for the South and how to take advantage of those opportunities, if they exist, if there are any. With a bit of humor, beyond the big tragedies, the war, pandemic, and the crisis, some very shocking phenomena. First, Fukushima. Fukushima paralyzed an immense, a huge region in Japan and stopped the production of some key semiconductors. So after Fukushima, assembly lines of cars here in Sao Paulo stopped. That's the degree of fragility of a globally integrated production chain. And even more shocking, a ship in the middle of the Suez Channel stopped world trade. I'm sure you saw at the time the satellite pictures with hundreds of ships on each end of the channel, waiting to pass, to go through. So beyond the shocking processes of financial crisis, the pandemic, and the war, these very shocking episodes also reinforce, strengthen the perception that this whole integrated, efficient way of producing globally manufactured goods maybe is not sustainable. Maybe it's not as efficient as we thought it was. Some people thought it was. Regardless of the other problems I mentioned before, regardless of the inequalities of income, inequalities of distribution of labor internationally, it was able, that was very clear, to produce with very low cost, in huge scale, manufactured goods. But it has these flaws. What came out of this perception of fragility, vulnerability, was a new mindset in firms, in governments, and also to some extent in societies. The mantra of the 80s, from the Japanese lean manufacturing just in time, was progressively substituted by just in case. The idea that you should reduce stocks to the minimum, inevitable level, was substituted to the need to be reliant, so you need to have stocks. The strategy to live with others, other firms, specialized firms, certain stages of production, so they would have to carry the capital needed for that, and you will just specialize in those activities with low capital and high value, was progressively substituted by the idea that I better have control myself. I can't rely on third parties. If you, I don't know if you're economists or not, but those who are should remember that institutional economics in the 80s, Williamson and others discussed how the boundaries between markets were established, internal markets and external markets. So that was being reassessed. Instead of externalizing activities, firms started considering bringing them back under their control. Of course, these things don't happen overnight. This involves investment decisions, this involves assessing payback time, this involves financing decisions. So I'm not saying that you can take a system as complex, as expensive, as large as this, and change it in a couple of weeks, in a couple of years. It took at least a decade and a half to build the system. In a period where capital was abundant, relatively cheap, regulations have been rewritten to make this possible. These conditions have changed. So even if you want to break this system apart, and build it again, it will take time. It will take time. Okay, so what I've done so far is come from the past to the present, describe how things evolved in the last decade and a half, 2008 to the war, today, and try to persuade you that things will change. There are new directions. So we could move to the second moment here and see if we can imagine, if we can guess what directions would there be. That's not very, very simple. It's tricky. It's tricky. If you look into what's been published and written by think tanks, consultancy firms, government documents, multilateral institutions, and you search for the word deglobalization. Have you done that? What's there? What have you seen? What have you read? What are the keywords?
I think the big thing is the realization of global change, right? To nearshoring of the global north, where you have the multinational companies.
Okay.
So companies are like doing nearshoring, friendshoring, reshoring activities. I think this has a big implication.
Sure, that's it. Reshoring, friendshoring, close-shoring. What else?
Decoupling. A lot of discussion about decoupling from China, from the US, for example.
Decoupling, that has to do with the New World Order, multilateral. That's true, that also comes.
Is this discussion regarding if it is a new bipolar world or it is a new bipolar world? It's this discussion regarding educação is the importance of how the labor is being redecorated. If it's going to be BRICS versus Eurasia versus NATO, or if we're going to have lots of multiple powers, and within each bloc, like Brazil, Mercosur is going to dispute with other countries in other smaller blocks, and they're going to do multiple fronts inside those blocks.
Okay. Anything else? Oh, that's all there. You're right. Have you seen anything else? Have you run across a very funny word? Globalization. Have you read that? Globalization. That would be an answer to an alternative to hyper-globalization. Have you run across the word? That's a good one. Fragmentation. That's a good one. Fragmentation. Have you seen that? I'm not sure I understood what it means, but apparently is that you will be global, but to some extent more segmented than before. Maybe that has to do with regional value chains. Maybe they imagine that since the world is going back to at least two different hegemons, China and the US, maybe they think they will have two world divided as it was during the Cold War. Friends of China, friends of the US. But anyhow, the word is there. Okay? Have you read rewiring? rewiring, if I understood, it means the need for global firms to reorganize the structure, worldwide structure of the corporation. What's coming out from think tanks, consultancy firms. By the way, the European Parliament has in its site has a survey of what think tanks are saying about deglobalization. It has more than 40, 50 papers, reports, you will find it there. But what does this mean? What can we do with this? If you're looking for opportunities for the South, and you're trying to guess what direction will manufacturing move in the next decade, in the next 15 years, any of those things helpful? There might be, but for sure they're not enough. For sure not enough. You see, in my assessment, I've been reading this for a while because I like it, but what I think is that it's too shallow. It's a mix of mindsets, people who were very much in favor of globalization and now feel frustrated. And they want to keep it going somehow. They perceive this global system as having at least some positive contribution. They wouldn't like to see it torn apart. No? They see advantages, and for sure this system brought some very positive results. It made manufactured goods available to much more people because they were cheaper. This system ended up industrializing and urbanizing Asia. Hundreds, millions of people moved from subsisting agriculture in inland in Asia to cities. They had access to services, health, education they didn't have before. Consumption patterns improved. Of course, I know, with an environmental impact, extremely worrisome. But you just can't keep people in poverty to save the planet. I mean, that's unfair. Not acceptable. So maybe some of this willingness to keep the system integrated, to keep it functioning, to rewire, to slow it down, maybe it has to do with this positive assessment, in spite of all that downsides of the global manufacturing. Maybe it has to do with that. Of course, there are also vested interests. Because if you're working and you're running a consultancy firm that advises governments how to globalize, you can't just go overnight to the other end of the narrative and say, no, we were wrong. We're sorry. You paid us a lot. Our advice was wrong. So there might be some vested interest. Sure. Of course there's law in here. It's a very funny paper I read the other day. And it was an essay, a very short essay in the press saying that too much reliance is not good. But too much resiliency is not good either. So, you see, people move here or for vested interests, or for mindsets, or for lobbying in very funny ways. Anyway, what's clearly perceived, you can clearly perceive in all these journalists, consultants, is some sort of advocacy. Of this sort, going back in time is not possible and not desirable. We should not break down completely the manufacturing system we built in the last 2 decades. Some sort of moderate adjustments, fine. Break it down, don't think about it. So for us in the South, this brings us, for us it's a problem, it's a challenge. First, because we, as I said before, we know that globalization had very asymmetric impacts in the South. If you look to Latin America, we deindustrialized. If you look to Asia, they industrialized. And there's every reason to imagine that deindustrialization, deglobalization will also have asymmetric impacts. So the South is not homogeneous. Some of us benefited, some of us lost during globalization, and probably the same thing will happen if we move backwards. Secondly, depending on the direction the system moves, there might emerge some opportunities or not. And I don't think, to be honest, that we're going to decide in which direction the system will move. We're not the leading actors. The South is not a leading actor. Actually, if we think of about how globalization happened, which were the main actors? It was capital, mostly financial capital, as leading actors. Governments, large governments, powerful governments, in alliance with capital. And I think the same will happen in the next direction, in the new direction. Being in the periphery means what? This center-periphery scheme of analysis is very popular here in Latin America, has to do with asymmetry, right? If you're in the center, you move things. If you're in periphery, things move and take you along, to some extent. So the South is not the leading actor in this process. Well, China is, of course, but China now is center. India could be, well, if it is, then India is center. But we're not. Latin America is not. Brazil is not. In spite of our rule, we're not. We're periphery. So, for us, this advocacy in favor of saving globalization from itself is not enough. Certainly is not enough. So let's leave aside this literature, these views I was commenting, and go back to what we can do starting from scratch, starting from our own experience in globalization and over time in our history. So I think we need to start, as I said, from scratch, asking ourselves how we track the changes that are already happening or will be happening in the system in the near future. If there is such a thing, if there will be such a thing as deglobalization, how can we measure it? How can we track it? That's one important thing. We have to battle with reality somehow. Beyond narratives, reality exists. So we can't just stay at the level of confronting narratives. globalization is good, deglobalization is bad, or else, or the contrary. We need some evidence to know where we are. That's one question. The other question is, beyond tracking, how we identify those driving forces that are visible, that are probable, that are relevant. Because the outcome, as always, will be the result of multiple interactions between variables and events and people. Not everything can be tracked. Not everything can be foreseen. You can predict something if you see strong tendencies of driving force, but the outcome is also, I wouldn't say stochastic, but it's unknowable. So we have to choose where to focus. And I'm talking for almost 50 minutes. Before keep talking, let me ask you, if you were to identify which variables are useful for tracking deglobalization, beyond these words, keywords, new words we were coming to, what do you think are the relevant variables we should look at to know if deglobalization is happening or not, if it's fast or slow, if it's localized or it's spread all over the world? It's happening in some sectors, but not in other. Some global chains are, but others are not. Where should we look at?
Industrial employment.
Okay.
A network of transactions before and after some events to see if there was some change in the connections in the transactions between sectors or countries. Will indicate in a augmentation or a diminution of trade in some sectors.
Okay.
Import content.
Sorry?
Import content.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
The financial flow of capitals.
Good, yeah. Yeah, of course. What else?
You can add the flows of foreign direct investment.
For sure, right? Any other idea?
Maybe in general, input and output relationships between countries, sectors.
Yeah. Makes sense? Good. You see what you're just mentioning here makes every sense, because how was globalization measured? If you go back to the reports from Unicamp, both the World Investment Report, annual report, if you go back to Trade and Development Report, also from Unicamp, if you go to the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, reports, how did they track globalization? They looked into financial flows, trade flows of goods and services, in the nature of flow, of trade flows, final goods, intermediate goods, mergers and acquisitions, technology flows, those are the variables we need to follow. Those are the variables that will tell us how fast and how far deglobalization is going. That means we know where to look at. Problems. We have a time lag that will only show evidence of deglobalization in these variables sometime from now. There's a delay. It takes time to create this data. It takes time to make it available in a standard way, which will allow you to compare countries. And so the answer, deglobalization, yes or no, won't be available as fast maybe as we would need it. But it will be there. It will be there. But at least we know where to look. We need to be patient. Of course, if you're within a country or a region, there are other sources of information you can rely on. Investment decisions of a very particular firms, and then you hear that a factory from a certain corporation will move from China to India, or from India back to China, or from the China to the US, or it will come to South America. But this is highly qualitative. It's hard to assess the overall picture with specific cases. But at least we know where to look. Good. Problem solved. Potentially solved. How about the other question, the other issue? There are a lot of things I'm gonna say like Rumsfeld now. There are a lot of things we know, a lot of things we don't know, a lot of things we know we don't know, and some things we don't know, right? Remember Rumsfeld, right? The Rumsfeld matrix. Try to explain why they invaded Iraq and ended up finding no mass destruction weapons, right? But anyhow, beyond Rumsfeld, it's true that some things we know and some things we don't know. So, but what is exactly we know? What can be considered driving forces that for sure will move the system in a certain way, in a certain direction? Beyond the outcome of an election that hasn't happened yet, and we can only guess, what we can bet on?
The war.
The war will have consequences that will stay with us, among us, for a long time, of course. What else? If you look into the future, what can you say, oh, this will be there in 5 years. This will make a difference in deglobalization, whatever it is.
US-China power rivalry will continue regardless who wins election in the United States, etc. It's here to stay.
Okay. Yeah. Agree with that, yeah. That's not very desirable, but it can happen. It can happen. But I don't know if we can take that for granted. Hopefully not.
Environmental disaster.
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Environmental disaster.
No. Okay.
Generalized pessimism. The Western protectionism worldview and policies. I think that even inside the European Union, and I forget to say EU or EU, depending on the language, but even inside the countries are getting more protective and regarding each other.
Yeah. Before stopping for coffee, let me suggest 3 driving forces that I consider, and try to persuade you, that will make a difference in deglobalization, whatever name you want to give it. First, you already mentioned geopolitics. This has a very interesting impact on what's going to happen with the world manufacturing system. The second will be the climate emergency. There's no way we can ignore this. It is happening already. And it's no longer climate change. We're entering a new phase, as Guterres said the other day. Huh? It's here and it will stay here for the next year. It will make a difference in investment decisions and government actions. The society demands. And the third one is technology. If there's one thing predictable, is how will technology evolve, because as you all are familiar with, it moves in an orderly way. Of course, you have disruptions and changes, but there are trajectories, predictable trajectories in technological evolution. So we can predict in what direction technology is moving. We can predict that in what direction the planet is moving. Not good direction, but predictable. And I think we have a good chance to guess in what direction the world order is moving. Away from a unique US hegemon to a new situation with at least two. So let's make a coffee break, and then we'll come back and try to explore those three driving forces and see if there's any way, there's any chance that the combination of those three driving forces will create some opportunity for us in the South. Okay? Forget about the coffee break. I've been informed by the organizer. The coffee break has been. You see how the future is unpredictable. In Brazil, we used to say that even the past is unpredictable. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
We say that. We say that. But since there's no coffee break, let me ask you, beyond this three, can you identify another driving force, plausible driving force of the world that will come in the next 5, 10 years? Regarding manufacturing, of course. I can't tell you who will win the next World Cup. But I hope it's Brazil. We need that. Do you think those three are way out of target?
I think there's something else we should take track of, is like increasing power and sovereignty of multinational companies, and then maybe how this can possibly balance out with the civil society movements, because I think at the moment it's very, very worrying that, like, when you look at economic and political power, like what kind of power multinational companies have, sovereignty that they can sue governments who want to impose environmental restrictions and so on. And I think that the political power is no longer just on governments and multinational institutions, but really some like multinational companies have a lot of power.
I think you're right. The way I see it, going back to what I said before, the leading actors of this process are large companies and large governments. So we need to balance the game is somehow. And for us in the South, it's extremely difficult. To tell you the truth, also in the North, societies are relatively weaker than they were before. Their ability to push things in the right direction are very limited. Social movements, of course, try to do this all the time, and it's good they do. But institutional support and a minimal level of cohesion is extremely difficult. Has never been so difficult as it is now. You have weak unions, weak political parties, polarized societies, media, which we don't control. Actually, we are controlled by it. So all this make collective action extremely painful. And so we can mobilize, we can organize relatively small groups with some strong identity content. Some of these movements can be massive, others are minority movements. So their effectiveness varies a lot.
I think there's opportunities to connect as well and for collaborative, like global actions of civil.
That's the way. You're right. So what I was trying to do is to see if what room is there as a result of the interaction of these three driving forces for society to defend itself, to collaborate, to integrate, to other people, to some forces, to strengthen the capacity to make a difference. Can I have your attention to a few more minutes? Let's go back to our discussion here, to our dialogue, because I have to leave in another place in a while, and we still have things to talk about. As I was saying, three driving forces, new technologies, climate change or now climate emergency, and somehow states, national states, back in the game. If you, a person who, for some reason, don't like neoliberalism, if you think that there was something intrinsically wrong in globalization, you might be tempted to believe that the combination of these three things is inevitably positive. Mostly the third one, having the state, national states, back in the game, should be considered something new, because it was absent or leave for the last 20, 30 years, or actually playing in the table of business. I think things are much more complicated than that. That's from the Economist 2016. They were already talking about deglobalization. Global companies in retreat. But if you think about deglobalization as we were doing before, and after all this successive shocks and crises, pandemic, and we think about what can come out of the interaction of these three driving forces: technology, climate, and state intervention in the economy. This potentially can drive us much farther than the economists imagined in 2016. We have a very rapid movement of the frontier, technological frontier, basically on two directions. First, more rapid, efficient, low-cost information processes and communication. The other one, the use of new sources of energy, new ways to storage energy, new materials. In many cases, potentially substituting manual for biomaterials. So this is the way the trajectories of technology and science are designed. It means a lot for manufacturing. First, because you can, through digital technologies, improve the control, automate, give autonomy to lots of products. Cars, whatever, drones. So control of any product can be done with some degree of intelligence or at least automation. The substitution of materials, sources of energy, the development of new forms to storage energy can drive us away from fossil fuels. So that will have also an impact, important impact on the climate, impact of manufacturing. Potential is huge, it's huge. If you think about artificial intelligence, quantum computing, it's a new world. The impact is not just on technology, potential, new products, new ways to control products, new way to energize products. One important thing thinking about Schumpeter is that this is something that will go out of the labs and into the market. And it's happening also. If you see those graphs show how costs of computing, sensoring and automated products, and digital and genomics, processing, editing, is coming down. So we have not only new technologies, but markets, emerging markets. In some cases, new markets, in other cases, restructuring existing markets. There are lots and lots of money to be made here. This is where global companies, every company, are looking for. Earnings, huge earnings. Huge earnings. They know this. They are preparing themselves to take advantage of this. This will mean a lot for manufacturing. Since we're in a climate emergency, this is already taking us much ahead of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's much more urgent. The 2030 agenda is not enough. If you remember the agreement in Paris, and the new agreements that will come, companies know this. Governments know this. But also huge, beyond the necessity, the need to move forward to avoid the climate crisis. There are lots of money to be done here. Lots. If you think about the transition the car industry is undergoing worldwide, it started in Germany, remember? Energy transition. Moving away from the internal combustion engine to the electric car. You take a vintage industry, highly concentrated, with new competitors like the Chinese, and you restructured it completely. Lots of capital to be accumulated. Lots of earning to emerge out of this. The companies know this. And they're preparing themselves to take advantage of this. They know in what direction they want the manufacturing system to move forward. Those are the vested interests. But beyond companies, which are one of the leading actors, as I said before, it's climate change, governments. immediately after the 2008 crisis, governments of the G7 and others also decided that they wouldn't let these new directions be exploited without taking part in it. Huge national programs to restructure the national economy. China made it 2025 made in China. At the time it was Obama at the presidency, advanced manufacturing. Germany, Industry 4.0. Japan had the Society 5.0. Lots of money, public money, treasury money, committed to these national projects. In the 21st century, in a global economy, in a flat world, as Thomas Friedman used to say, this should be happening. We were all citizens of a global economy. How come national governments are back in the picture, back in the game? It has only increased. If you take Bidenomics, green growth, green recovery, governments are taking back instruments, modes of intervention in the economy that were supposedly abolished by that agreement. Buy American jobs, green growth in the US. So these are symptoms that national identities, national projects, at least in the developed countries in the North, are very important. And the alliance between business and government is seen as something key to drive the economy in the direction that will allow these countries to capture the North, to capture most of the value that could be created in this transition. Environmental, technological. So this brings us to the question I posed before, the coffee break. The North is very much aware of the opportunities, is very much active in designing ways to capture these opportunities. What are the opportunities for us in the South? Are there any? How can we take advantage of them? We don't have these leading actors, not with the same strength, not with the same capabilities. Oh, Brazil has some global companies, of course, yeah, we do. In some sectors like meat, food processing. India has some companies, of course, software, telecommunications. Other countries have some assets, but none of the size of the capabilities comparable to those in the North. Actually, if you think about Brazil, most of our manufacturing is no longer Brazilian. It's here, but it's not ours. Every global company in manufacturing has a subsidiary here in Brazil. So, are there opportunities? Are there challenges? Are there threats in this? Let's think negatively for a while. There might be some opportunities, but are there threats? Can we be negatively impacted by these transitions implemented by global firms and powerful governments? Yeah. So we have to be extremely clever, skeptical into coming on board of these transitions without being careful, avoiding threats, taking opportunities. I'll give you two examples, one threat and one opportunity. Just to give you the flavor of what I'm trying to convey here to you. One threat. Let's imagine that trying to bring green growth, green manufacturing, reduce the carbon footprint of mobility, urban mobility in Brazil, we launched a huge program to substitute internal combustion cars, engine cars, for electric cars. Is this good or bad? Is this an opportunity or a threat? The way I see it, it's a threat. It's a threat. To begin with, we will destroy lots of employment and small, medium-sized firms in the auto parts industry in Brazil. We will have to import in huge numbers, engines, electric engines, batteries, probably from China, but it could be also from Mexico. Tesla will sell their cars here, not for everyone because they're expensive, but low-end market could be sent for the middle class in Brazil. Let's suppose that's the price we need to pay to save the environment. Actually, no, we don't have to. Because cars in Brazil run on a mixture of fossil fuel and ethanol, which has a level of emissions relatively low. The gain in emissions will be marginal. Most of the emissions in Brazil have to do with deforestation, has to do with cattle, not with cars. But car companies will make huge amounts of money with this, especially if we subsidize them and car owners. We will drain public funds for this. So it's new technology, it's government intervention, subsidies, or tax reductions, yeah? And it's good for climate. Is it an opportunity? Not really. I think it's a threat. That doesn't mean we don't have to do it, but we must be careful. If we want to do it in the South, let's start with public transportation. Let's substitute internal combustion engines from buses in the cities for electric buses in the cities. Now, if we do that, if we do it in the right way, we might even take thousands of cars out of the streets. That's a good way to reduce emissions. Marginally. But we will substitute individual cars for public transportation, which we need badly. So if you're clever, you can design a policy action that would have environmental benefits without having social costs and fiscal costs also. So threats are there, and it's up to us in the South to engineer, to design policy actions that take advantage of the opportunities that there might be and keep us away from the threats. Let's give you an example about an opportunity now. And I'm not saying these opportunities are available and desirable for everyone in the South. I'm just saying that I'm talking about Brazil because that's easy for me. I would love to hear your ideas on the opportunities other southern countries have. But let's talk about an opportunity. I talked before about pandemic, the perception of vulnerability, the need of self-reliance, resiliency. Well, I consider that there are good opportunities here related to health. Maybe not so relevant from the point of view of the environmental crisis, emergency, but certainly relevant from the point of view of social justice, public health, public well-being. Should we use the resources we have in Brazil to gain some sort of self-reliance, autonomy, resiliency in the production of vaccines? Yes, of course. That can be done reducing costs and increasing scale, using new technology to develop vaccines. We do have public labs in Brazil. We do have research capabilities. We do have skilled labor. We do have public institutions. And above all, we have a national health system. It's public procurement. So we do have the tools. We do have the technological, scientific capabilities. We do have the factories. We do have the public labs. We can do this. That would be something worthwhile to use public funds. Can we do it alone? No, not really. We do need some technology transfer. We haven't developed on an industrial scale the capacity to produce such vaccines. And we don't completely control the new technology, biotechnologies to develop vaccines. But that's an opportunity that would be worthwhile looking for partnerships in the South, or even in the North. As I said before, that would improve environmental situation, but would reduce inequality, improve health conditions for low-income people who rely on the national health system. I think that, to sum up, there are threats and opportunities. We will, for sure, be invited by the leading actors, global companies, and strong governments to take actions to improve the environmental situation, to take advantage of the new technological potential, but the ability to avoid, the capacity to avoid threats and take advantage of opportunities depends basically on our capacity to organize and mobilize people to make sure that at the end of the day, all these initiatives reduce inequality, improve living conditions, increase well-being, growth has to be green, but green is not enough. It has to come together with less inequality, more well-being, and more national self-reliance. Not to be autonomous, completely independent, but to be safe. Especially, as some of you mentioned, in a world that's moving towards critical conflict conditions. We don't have to choose sides in this. We better not. If the world is going to be divided into two confronting powers, China and the US, is that a problem? We can't afford to choose sides. Not in the name of democracy, not in the name of civilization, because we have other priorities. We better stay away from that. Brazil needs to talk, to dialogue, to sell, to buy from both sides. We can't afford to be sanctioned by one side because the other doesn't agree with our alignment. So we better remain non-aligned. Non-aligned. That has always been the tradition in Brazil and many other countries in the South. That's important. The world will put us in a position where we better be non-aligned. Well, I just gave you two examples of opportunities and threats. I guess the key variable that will make a difference is our ability to organize, mobilize, as I said before, to make sure that state intervention in our countries in the South is for the good of society, not for the good of business, and also not for the good of our other governments. We have to please business. They know how to earn money. We don't need to submit ourselves to the desires, the wishes, to the projects of other nations. We need autonomy. I guess that's it. So now let me question you. Are there any opportunities in your country? I don't know where you come from. I should know because that's in school, but tell me, do you see any threats, opportunities? How can we mobilize, organize, cooperate? South-South, North-South? How do we bring social movements to this agenda? You probably notice I don't mention political parties, huh? It's not my fault, it's their fault. Yeah. Is that it? Well, I hope this is useful. You never know. We'll see. The change will happen. And at least we should be able to track this. Don't get confused by lobbying, consultants, firms, think tanks. Do your own homework. There's a huge research agenda here. Huge, huge. Not just to understand better what's going on, but as I said yesterday at the presentation of the book, to make changes, make things different. Direction where things will move might not be the best for us. Let's try to change it. You're young, most of you. So you have vested interest in the future. So, thank you very much for your attention. And I'll stop here.